You're probably encrypting data today like it will last till the end of time. However, with the advent of the quantum computer, this end of time might be tomorrow. That's the subject of today. In Threat Talks, a deep dive into post-quantum cryptography.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
With me today is Jeroen Scheerder, who's a researcher here at Ontoit. And today we dive deep in this post-quantum cryptography. So Jeroen, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Before we dive deep in this subject, Jeroen, what is quantum computing and why is it a threat to our current encryption standards?
Okay, quantum cryptography is really hard. So currently we're using cryptography as a way to safeguard secrets. The basis of cryptography is that there are certain mathematical puzzles that are hard to solve given the fact that we're using certain computers. These mathematical problems typically lie in the realm of number theory, and the computers we're using use binary representations, 0 and 1. The quantum thing about quantum computing is that we're not using these bits which have two states anymore, but we're building them using so-called qubits, which have both values simultaneously. Yeah. And this strange notion, this quantum notion of the qubit, enables you to write a different class of algorithms, and this, as a mental game, has been performed. So on paper, we have quantum computing algorithms that actually solve these mathematical puzzles in a way which is much quicker than our classic binary-based algorithms. Specifically, we have, to name one thing, we have the RSA family of symmetric key.
It's a quite famous one and
yes.
used
It's
a lot. Yeah.
I think it's the main staple of classic cryptography, and it uses a bit size. And the key thing in RSA is the factorization problem, determining the prime factors that make up any arbitrary number. And you use then a number which has a size in bits. And depending on that size, it gets harder and harder. And a mainstay in algorithms, cryptographic algorithms used now, for example, is RSA with a key length of 2048 bits. And this takes, given as much resources we can spend, takes forever
with the current hardware we have. Yeah, okay.
But a quantum algorithm exists, Grover's algorithm, which tells us that we can build a quantum computer for an RSA key with n bits in size that is soluble within a reasonable amount of time, say a day, on a quantum computer with about n number of qubits, which may of course be 2,000 or 4,000. In this case, it's about 4,000.
Maybe it's good to mention here, we're still struggling with getting a stable quantum computer.
Yes, I think right now, we're about 14 or 16 qubits. And these things are, of course, really hard to get stable indeed. It is a quantum state after all, and well, the physics tends to be complex. So there is a challenge. But, of course, we're working towards that, towards finding ways to build quantum computers of larger numbers of qubits.
Yeah, so the whole idea about this post-quantum paper about who is NIST is one of the parties that
yes. So there's this projected day in time which is sort of apocalyptic. It's called Q-Day, and that's the day in which at which we succeed in building a quantum computer with sufficient qubits to actually do this crack, this solution to RSA 2048 within a day.
Okay, I didn't know that we even had a Q day. Is
No,
there
there is
also already a date pointed towards the Q day?
Yes, take your agendas and mark. There's a sort of soft consensus between researchers in the field that Q day is near in the future, and near in the sense that it's expected to happen within 5 to 15 years from now.
Okay, so if I'm lucky, then I'm going to make it, and I can celebrate Q day.
Yeah, you'll probably make it. I might not, but even in any way, the data that you're storing now, that's encrypted with RSA 2048, will be exposed once Q-Day happens.
Yeah. Okay, but that brings us also to the question. So that means that it is data that needs to be stored longer or be secured longer than at least 5 years, because that was the minimal the year you said that we will have this Q-Day.
Yes, you need to do better.
Yeah, so first of all, the data that you store then should be there for more than 5 years. So if you think, okay, this is only valid for 3 years, and if it is, then I can just remove it, or it doesn't matter anymore, then it's okay. But if you have data that needs to be longer, safely secured and stored, then you should take another algorithm, or is it sufficient to go with, for example, RSA 4096 as a bit length?
What I just said is, I think, provides the answer. Grover's algorithm tells us that the quantum computer that solves RSA with n bits in size is to the order of n qubits.
So it's a linear scale.
Yes, which means once we can build a 4,000 qubit thing, then it will probably be also in the near future that we can build something twice or 4 times as
we
big.
really need to go to different algorithms.
Yes. So, and that's of course why in the cryptography community there have been initiatives, mainly by the NIST, for example, which has been active in defining and designing cryptographic standards for a long time, towards something called post-quantum cryptography. Mm-hmm. And there is a body of proposals, different approaches, and this, of course, may sound strange because we need one solution, of course. But current cryptography is a relatively well understood. Yep. It's a relatively solid, if somewhat murky, corner of mathematics, and analysis of cryptographic algorithms is relatively well understood.
And with analysis, you mean that we can prove the safety of these algorithms?
Examine, prove.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have ways to check whether or not, for example, a hashing algorithm is collision free, or whether we can actually produce collisions. Whether or not we have side channel attacks, so injecting some information gives us information about the cryptographic material if we observe the encrypted content. These kind of things. We have ways of reasoning about that. A body of a toolbox.
That makes the current crypto algorithms and ciphers really robust.
Yes. Okay. So there we have a rigorous way of dealing with them and evaluating them. And this is far less the case in the post-quantum stuff. And it's not just because the quantum stuff is hard, but also because the mathematical problems that are targeted, that are used as the basis of the post-quantum cryptography are much, much harder and much more complex, and just much less understood parts of mathematics itself. So there are 5 main topics there, and they're all much less studied than number theory, for example.
Very young field of mathematics and investigation on how this works. Okay.
And basically everything, of course. I believe Mao Zedong was once asked what he thought about the French Revolution, and Mao said it's too early to tell. And in this sense, this branch of mathematics is young. We're studying it only for a few hundred years, which means we do not know that much about it.
Okay, I'm not a mathematic guy, but it sounds like It's already a long time.
And this sounds like scare talk, but I think the thing that's hard for me to digest is that there is a realistic threat against the cryptography that we are used to today, and that we've learned to trust. Also, because we've studied it that well. So now the bottom perhaps drops out a bit. And we need to embrace a whole new class of algorithms that we're much less comfortable with.
Okay, so we know, or at least we have a proposal on paper. These are the ciphers and that we can use.
A number of things to choose from, yes.
Okay, yeah, and so we have something to choose from. But how do we determine if we actually need it? Because we're talking about 5 to 15 years for Q-Day. We have a proposal on these new mechanisms. But as a company, how can I choose?
I like this question. And the first thing I always answer when someone asks me this, what is my gut instinct is always, you don't need that data at all. You have a protection responsibility towards data that you're storing that you shouldn't have to store anyway.
Yeah, there's not much data that you say that should be stored for 5 years or longer.
I think there's an instinctive knee-jerk reaction into just collecting as much data as you can and then storing it indefinitely, and you shouldn't. Because it's just hard to do safely. It costs money. It's a risk. So pivot there. So go towards a more data minimalistic approach. Collect the data you need and store it as long as you need, and that seriously diminishes the problem.
That makes sense, because if you don't need the data and it should not be safeguarded for 5 years or more, then you don't have to do anything. So that makes sense.
Now, of course, in general, if people just didn't is rarely a solution to problems, because people will do and people did, and we have this data. So the next thing you need to do is to assess the data that you need to store. And you need to store that data. It's not just, I need to store this data. I need to store this data for a particular purpose and for a particular amount of time. I may need this data in 5 years, but do you still need it after 15 years?
That's a good question. For my personal experience with companies, they rarely know how long they want or need to keep the data.
Yeah, and deleting data is a hard problem, by the way. But and we need a solution for that as well. But let's assume or pretend that we fixed that problem of people actually being able to delete data at all. Then we can actually consider a lifetime of data. And the lifetime of data, in this case, pretty much determines the time path you need to implement for cryptographic protection to make sense. So if you store data for 3 years, you're probably good, because the consensus
you can still stay with RSA. There's no problem there. But let's assume let's say I'm a hospital storing patient data. I expect that patient to be alive for at least 10 more years, so I need to store it for 10 years. We can debate on it, but let's assume that's 10 years that I need to store and secure it. What should I do then?
Okay, you make that assessment, and the first assessment here is I need to store data, and I need to retain it for at least 10 years, and that data will need to be safe after 10 years. So assume breach, of course, so that the encrypted data will be exposed to an adversary and he should not be able to crack it. That's what we're talking about here. Then choose an algorithm that fits within that purpose. TNO has built a brilliant tool that guides you through a questionnaire and ask you these questions. What type of data do you need to protect? How long do you need it? What are your protection needs? What is your compliance framework? Because we're in the early stages of this, right? Yep. So we have different bodies doing different advices, and that's also expressed in different auditing standards and different compliance frameworks. So a particular post-quantum algorithm that is acceptable for NIST may not be acceptable for PCI.
Okay, and this TNO assessment will tell you this is the algorithm that you should use for this data, this assessment.
Yes, pretty much yes. So I like this thing, and of course, it's probably not perfect, and it will need to be adapted in the future. But I like this approach,
Yeah, and
in which
also
you
make
actually
it,
asks a consumer challenging question about what are your needs.
Yeah, it
and
makes
then,
it accessible for me.
Yes,
so I can think about
and
this
then the
post-quantum.
following things are on the menu, which, by the way, immediately opens the question that lies next. On paper, you may need to do this type of cryptography, but your software and maybe even your hardware needs to support that.
Yeah, so you also have a migration period that you need to make sure that your hardware, software, etc. is
Yes.
all migrated to support this.
Yes,
algorithm.
and migration is a process. It assumes the availability of the technology, and even if the technology is in principle available, that does not mean it's implemented from day zero, because going from day zero not there to D-Day implemented is a difficult process, we know, for organizations.
Okay, and during our pre-talk, before we started the recording, we discussed Michael Mosca, if I'm not mistaken, inequalities
Yes.
formula, which basically takes this number. So how long do I need to take the data? How long does my migration take?
Yes.
And as long as that's longer than the Q day.
Yes, as long as your data is done by Q day, then you're good. And Q day, of course, is a singular instance. That just means that some research facility succeeds in producing this thing, but this does not mean that an arbitrary script kiddie.
Yeah, there's of course the first one is very costly.
Yes. So your particular threat may be the script kiddie, in which case Q day is a bit later. But if you're targeted by, say, Shinbet or something like that, which has resources and an incentive to target specific things, then of course Q-Day will be a bit earlier.
Okay, and what would be your, let's assume you ask for advice for a company to advise them on what should we do? We know we have this data. We know now that we should first investigate how long we should store it. What would be your action plan?
Keep calm.
Okay, it's always a good idea.
And keep buggering on. That's what Churchill would have said. But that's a general outline. But the don't panic stuff is real. But do plan.
Okay.
So you need, and I think as in many things, there is a lack of reflection and lack of self-knowledge. So there is, I believe, sometimes a limited understanding in the nature of the data and the retention needs. So
a good moment to start with it then?
Good moment to start with it then. And of course, as with anything, some things are more important than others. So there, for any company, some data is really, really, really key. And you know that this data needs to be safeguarded. And which is good because usually these things are relatively well known and well supported, and there's an incentive to do something about them, and that's where you start. You do the important things first. So if you're a credit card company and you need to store very sensitive financial stuff, that's probably your first thing to do. Start there. And you will get a notion of what it takes to get that right. And you have a business incentive to actually do it.
Yeah, and with that we now know that quantum computers are coming, so it's a good time now to at least start planning and see where you need to take action or not.
Yes, and even for skeptics, I would say planning is an important phase, because the end of planning can always be that you plan to postpone, which I would not. Which I think is probably not a wise decision, but the fact that you considered it.
Yeah, is
already a gain. Yeah. So we're planning to do nothing this year. We'll start next year is a planning.
Yeah, it's also a strategy. Yeah, maybe it fits your
yes, and it may or may not be wise, but have that planning and assess your data. Investigate your options. And by the way, I did mention this combating this inherent data greed and the impulse towards infinite safekeeping.
Yeah, it might be a good moment also to go over your data and do I really need this?
Start resisting that impulse. That makes life so much easier.
I think that will be challenging for a lot of companies, but
Of course, yes.
it will make your life easier.
That's a real change, of course. But yeah.
Okay, well then I think we come to an end here because we have a kind of a plan here. It's don't panic, like you said. That's the first thing and always a good thing to start with. Don't procrastinate. Just get started. Come up with a plan, a strategy, even if it means that you will postpone this for maybe 1 or 2 years. But be aware, quantum computing is coming. We don't know how fast, but you gave a time frame between 5 and 15 years, which for some data sets might already be critical. So it might be really good to start with it. So I think we already have a good some good information that we can start with getting our plan together. So thank you, Jeroen.
Thank you.
And thanks to our listeners. Thanks for listening in. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you also now are planning what you will do with this post-quantum era, where we need to do better encryption. And if you like what you saw, then please like and subscribe. And visit the threatdesktalks.com if you want to have more information on this subject. Thanks for watching us and hope to see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Onto-It Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.